The scene of a murder.
Cops, police chiefs condemned what happened here.
I'm very cautious about what we're seeing in the world today about this revisionist history.
Okay, breathe. Everyone saw that video and everyone knew what they saw.
It was gut-wrenching.
The birth of a movement.
This just came from sort of all of that bottled up frustration and anger.
If we don't get no justice, they don't get no peace.
After the protests,
George Floyd, George Floyd.
the riots, the fires.
The events that night at 30th Chicago, that just, it erupted.
Came the beauty, the tributes, and the promises to change.
They are putting their fists up in the air, you know, they're saying, you know, we demand change, we want to see change, we demand justice.
Changes many
But what about us?
are still chasing.
Listening to that, how does that make you feel?
It makes me want to have a conversation.
A conversation that continues today.
It can be heavy. I think a lot of it is less talking, more listening.
From Minneapolis to Memphis.
3 former Memphis police officers charged in the deadly beating of Tyrie Nichols have been acquitted.
It too was captured on video. It again, to me, just reaffirms we've still got a lot of work to do.
If time heals all wounds,
When you go to George Floyd Square, it just seems like it just happened.
how much has healed in 5 years?
We're still using the same use of force policy that we were using 5 years ago. That is very frustrating to me.
There's obviously systemic problems here. It's not just in the police department, it's in the society, it's in the city government.
And it can't just be all on MPD.
As the world reflects on May 25th, 2020,
Space for us to think, to be solemn.
we take you back to the intersection where it seems impossible to move on.
If we look at it now, it still looks like a third world country.
From George Floyd Square
Not all cops are bad cops, and just trying to help change that perspective.
to City Hall,
As we try to make those changes, let's not break things that are working well.
to the Capitol,
I know bad things are gonna happen. Bad things are gonna happen out of the Minneapolis Police Department.
we are asking,
What I want is when they happen, are the policies in place to immediately address it.
what has changed after the murder of George Floyd?
You can still work in a system that is flawed, but try to offer about making change there.
When I reflect on the people that I've spoken with, I just think of all of their stories combined. I mean, we have to really focus on the people aspect of this story, not just a place. It's the people inside of that place.
You got to know your neighbors in order to be able to put the neighbor back into the hood. You have to be able to hold a conversation.
You can't tell the story of George Floyd, of what happened to him, of George Floyd Square, without focusing on the people. This has taken a lot of time. Like I said, I've been there, I don't know, maybe over a dozen times just within this story.
It's traumatic, very traumatic.
Yes.
And for hearing him call for his mother,
Mama, I love you.
that's the first thing, you know, as a black male, you hear that, and you know, it's just, if it wasn't heartbreaking for anyone, you know, it was a tearjerker.
These are the people in the community that are hurting. These are the people that have to wake up every morning that they put their feet on the floor and run their business.
As parts of Minneapolis burned, the businesses that quickly became a memorial site focused on protecting what once was.
We was standing there, we was using our bodies to stand there, we was using garbage cans, and we started using vehicles.
Now 5 years later, the business owners are still protecting their space.
You're gonna be heard.
Just in a different way.
There's at least 12 black-owned businesses, and at least if you include culinary arts, at least 8 arts organizations all on one block. I think that's something really special.
Special, but also a struggle.
Foot traffic is low.
Business is really very, very slow in this area.
So would everyone say that it's pretty slow?
Yeah.
They all decided to open their doors on this once busy street for business because of the constant flow of traffic.
Up until 2020, I would say we just saw things really start to pop. Every single storefront here was full. There was a lot of activity, there was a lot of stuff going on. It is different now.
So much changed after May 25th of 2020. Barricades restricted access for over a year. Crime climbed as the number of officers dropped. A dozen business owners, including Edwin Reed,
I have not been able to sleep because I'm worried about my business.
Sure.
have sued the city, claiming it failed to protect their businesses as gangs and activists took over the area while the business owners were forced to watch.
I can appreciate when things are going crazy and there's not cops to respond.
The city is now dedicating officers to the area to help address those concerns.
Say hi and we can try to help all we can. All right?
But some say it's too late.
Where were you guys for 4 years straight?
There are 2 patrol officers specifically for 38th and Chicago in that area. And walking around with them and seeing the reaction from the community to the police.
It's being open if they want to have a conversation. Like, I'm willing to hear where they're coming from.
Like, listening to that, how does that make you feel?
It makes me want to have a conversation.
I just didn't know that it was that heavy still to this day.
I've been an officer here with MPD for about 9 years.
I think when I met with the officers and walking around with the officers, there are 2 patrol officers specifically for 38th and Chicago in that area.
Hello. Good morning. How are you?
When people think of patrolling, some people think they just hop in their car and they drive around. These officers are on foot, walking.
Say hi and we can try to help all we can. All right?
There was what someone in the community called a no-go zone.
There was no law.
Which is where police just couldn't police, pretty much.
38th in Chicago has not been open to traffic for most of the last year after the murder of George Floyd.
Monday evening, May 25th, Mr. Floyd was killed. Early Tuesday morning, 38th in Chicago, the scene of his killing, became a gathering place.
So I've made my way down to 38th in Chicago. Of course, this is the intersection. The store in front in front of this store is where George Floyd was killed. And now this has really become a memorial for this community. I mean, look at all of these flowers that have been put out. I mean, this is just a small portion of the flowers that have been brought here. We've seen murals pop out here, beautiful artwork.
And so you have some people saying, okay, we consider this sacred ground. This is where a black man was killed by a police officer. We should cherish this piece of ground. Understandable. A lot of people, of course, agree with that.
I'm gonna try not to cry. I get it. I understand that the city needs to open it up and allow traffic through, but the people in this community wanted it shut down for a reason, and a very valid reason. I think until the demands are met, that it should stay safe and for people who want to come and pay their respects.
My boyfriend knew George. They came from the same hood, 3rd Ward, Houston. We are doing this for you, 3rd Ward. We are here for you, Houston.
This kind of sacred ground is a place to remember and celebrate George Floyd's life. There have been, on this end of Chicago here, there have been speakers all day promoting messages of peace but calling for justice.
And unfortunately, there were bad actors that came into that intersection.
It was closed, but it was open for people to come in and do whatever they want to do here.
We couldn't foresee the future, but once the future started unraveling in front of us, we knew that we needed to open up the streets.
Now we see firsthand what it's like to not have the police in your community, because we was in our community, police in our community, but we wasn't arresting anybody.
Because I hear gunshots every night. Pow, 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 shot him 3 times and drove off.
She was gonna call the cops on me after George Floyd.
I was held hostage by a group of protesters in Loring Park.
Minneapolis City Council member Andrea Jenkins represents the area where Floyd was killed.
It is our responsibility to demonstrate leadership.
A voice stuck in the middle as the city struggled to reopen and rebuild the area now known as George Floyd Square.
We were gonna have a peaceful protest outside your house.
In my car, I was not allowed to move my vehicle for almost 2 hours.
Were they saying anything?
Yeah. Leave George Floyd Square alone. They wanted me to sign a contract, I guess, that I would never, try to reopen. So they made up this thing with 10 demands on it.
And I heard reports from neighbors, everything from their being forced to give bribes in order just to get out of their driveways, to get their cars down the alley, to get to work.
When the ambulance couldn't come through here, they was telling us to bring the bodies down there to them because they wouldn't come here without a police presence.
So there was just a huge need that I saw, because there's a limit when you're on an ambulance. You can't necessarily go into some of these situations to help people. And that was frustrating because I wanted to be able to do that.
Officer Xander Kronfeld was one of those people who entered the no-go zone, but he wasn't an officer at the time. He was a paramedic.
I can appreciate when things are going crazy and there's not cops to respond. And there were plenty of times where I was on the ambulance and I'd ask for cops, and they'd say, nope, there's no cops. Even when the ambulance was asked for it. Ready?
His experiences at George Floyd Square inspired him to join MPD in 2021. Now patrolling what he calls uncharted territory, he's transparent about his experience.
You'd have families coming up and be like, please, can you just go in there? And I did go in some of those situations, even there weren't police that were available, and I have dealt with some of the most crazy, traumatic things that I will never forget doing that. And I've never felt, and I realize and I appreciate how much safer I felt when there were cops.
And so to see where we are 5 years later, where officers are actually walking around the no-go zone.
They'll tell us their experiences of what it was like, in 2020. And there was, the feelings of, being unsafe.
It kind of hits you in a sense of, wow, like are we transforming here? Is there some sort of transformation?
Oh, yeah, and like here, hey, Dwight.
And the reaction from people, some people like it, some people don't.
I mean, you don't know everybody. And sometimes especially, you can be the conduit where people want to express maybe negative feelings, or especially, now we have a news camera, everyone's going to let you know what their feelings are.
While we were walking around, there were some people yelling at the officers, calling out names of people who have been killed by police officers. Listening to that, how does that make you feel?
It makes me want to have a conversation.
I was listening to some conversations, and there was a woman, for instance, she was talking about history as far as with her family and police officers. She hated police officers. She flat out told them that to their face as they're standing right in front of her. She said, I don't like police officers. I don't talk to police.
In a lot of ways, they're not reacting just to policing either. People are reacting, in my opinion, to just lived experiences, to history, to all kinds of trauma.
How do you change minds, though?
I think
this is emotion, this is hurt, this is maybe they can relate. How do you change that, if you can, or how do you?
Again, as an individual, I just have to focus on what I can do as an individual, and by and large, like I said, in my experience, it's just being open to having a conversation with someone and acknowledging whatever experience that they had.
Their role is trying to just listen and then to understand that why, and maybe just to give some people a different perspective. How has that changed you, what happened in May of 2020?
I would say it changed me in a sense, not that it's really changed me, but just being more open to how people are feeling, what people think, and really truly listening to them and their concerns. I want to apologize for that because it is frustrating. And it hurts me to know that you're hurting.
I think that's the whole purpose of them being there, is just to try to build the relationship with the community beyond their badge, honestly.
Not all cops are bad cops, and just trying to help change that perspective.
Enforcing the law in a way that helps rebuild trust, so that people in the community can trust that they can call the Minneapolis police, that we will show up for everyone.
Although this happened in 2020, the Minneapolis Police Department is still struggling in staffing. They're still trying to fill the gaps.
The police department has lost hundreds of employees since May of 2020 and is facing a significant staffing shortage.
We know that after the precinct burned, after the destruction of the city,
our city erupted.
Crime and violence skyrocketed. At the same time, people walked away from the profession.
How were the conversations with your officers after that?
They were raw. They were candid. They were honest. I recall having a conversation with my command staff and telling them, I understand the weight of the moment and what you may be experiencing and going through, that our city's experiencing and going through. And this may be difficult. It's going to be the most difficult time in your career ever. And if you come back tomorrow and you decide, I got to tap out, it's just too much, I said I will honor and respect that.
I think the term broken is a very fair statement.
The departures come in the wake of George Floyd's murder and subsequent rioting and unrest.
It's not about the dollars and cents, and many people may think it is.
Attorney Ron Muser represents a total of 206 Minneapolis emergency responders, overwhelmingly cops who have turned in their badge over the last 16 months, citing mental health issues.
It is hard for some of these officers to drive past that old police precinct. It has been incredibly traumatizing.
I knew I had to get our city through the hardest part. And, you know, we saw the protests, the demonstrations, the riots, the looting, the arsons.
And confidence and support from the police, for the police here, completely collapsed.
And I knew I had to get us through that. And I needed to see increments of change.
I have been speaking with the former police chief at the time when this happened on May 25th of 2020. People know him as Rondo.
I'm a student of history, and so I understood, even before I joined the Minneapolis Police Department, its history. Some good, but also some not so good moments in the history in terms of the Minneapolis Police Department's relationship, particularly with the black community.
If the murder of George Floyd brought a reckoning, there is no mistaking for whom the reckoning has come. Tanae Wells has seen the fires burn before.
Do you think they targeted your father because of his activism?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
That beating him up was to teach him a lesson?
Oh, absolutely.
In May of 1964, police arrested Wells for using profane language. 3 Minneapolis cops held him down as a rookie, David Clunas, beat him with a blackjack. The paper said it turned into a near race riot.
And so a bunch of cops beat him up, broke his ribs.
When charges were dropped a month later, Raymond Wells told reporters prejudice in Minneapolis has been hidden for years. But take a look at that same front page, and you'll see this headline: Mayor denies any serious race bias among policemen.
I had the history prior to even joining the department, so I knew that coming into it.
You dealt with discrimination before too, right, within the department?
That
How
is
was
correct.
that for you?
That is correct. It was an opportunity for me and for other African-American officers to try to offer solutions to correct some of those systemic, decades-old problems.
I did ask because it was so fresh on the mind of, you know, what had happened with Tyrie Nichols in that case, and the officers in that case were acquitted.
3 former Memphis police officers charged in the deadly beating of Tyrie Nichols have been acquitted. A jury returned that not guilty verdict after 8 hours of deliberations. It was in 2023, 5 officers attacked Nichols after he fled from a traffic stop. The 29-year-old died 3 days later.
It too was captured on video. And so it again, to me, just reaffirms we've still got a lot of work to do.
The city has been without a full-time police chief since Medaria Arredondo stepped down earlier this year.
There's an old proverb that says, those who lead the revolution aren't necessarily the ones to lead the change. And so internally, I just knew that I got us to the point where it was time to hand off the baton.
This afternoon, residents will have a chance to share their thoughts on the possible replacement. That man is Brian O'Hara, nominated by Mayor Jacob Fry last month to take charge of the MPD. O'Hara is currently the deputy mayor of Newark, New Jersey.
Dealing with the protests, large protests in Newark where we were police officers, and then just watching the stuff happening on TV, the fires, the destruction of the city, it was unreal. And certainly I never thought I would be here at that time.
The first thing I told Chief O'Hara is I said, I apologize, I'm sorry. And he leaned in and he said, Rondo, why are you apologizing? I said, because inevitably, in a few days, you're gonna go home to your significant other and cuss me out to no end because of all the things you've had to inherit from me. But I said, I want you to know that all the decisions I made were to try to better this police department and the relationship with our communities.
Coming here as the chief was pretty incredible. It was very, very heavy. I have felt like it is the most significant, most important thing that I will ever do in my life.
We need a police department that is very honest about reform, but we still need a police department.
That's why we have consent decrees.
And it essentially gives you a handbook of what should be happening.
It's called a consent decree, a court enforceable agreement.
So when you talk about a consent decree, you talk about digging into the city of Minneapolis and its police department. There's just a lot there. And there's a lot of red flags.
On behalf of the Minneapolis police, we recognize that some terrible things have happened here in the past.
The big question is, we have this consent decree, we have these progress reports, but are we really seeing change 5 years later?
This settlement agreement envisions substantial reforms that must be fully implemented and practiced to perfection by all members of the MPD at all times.
So, of course, we have what's called the state consent decree, and that is where we are right now.
It's called a consent decree, a court enforceable agreement.
I feel optimistic. The agreement isn't change in and of itself, but it charts a clear roadmap to it.
And it essentially gives you a handbook of what should be happening. So when you talk about a consent decree, you talk about digging into the city of Minneapolis and its police department. There's just a lot there. And there's a lot of red flags. They have high turnover, inadequate staffing. And some of these positions are in oversight and accountability, and that's the struggle.
Many of them said how frustrated they were to see people not being held accountable for things that they knew they should be held accountable for. It wasn't good for the officers themselves.
1,100 cases had not yet been reviewed. Now, this could be when maybe an officer uses chemical spray, maybe when they use a certain pressure point technique. Those cases hadn't been touched either. When you have certain cases, especially when it reaches the level of, if you're talking about something as severe as officer-involved shootings, these are, of course, cases that need to be reviewed. So when you talk about understaffing and not having the people who can properly review those, you have a problem.
In Minneapolis, the pace of police reform is slow.
It's absurd that we have to wait.
For Marquita Stevens of the Urban League Twin Cities, patience is thin.
So in terms of overall trust in the police department, do you think it's gotten better?
I don't see any indicators from the police department that would suggest that it's gotten better.
Getting here today took a ton of work, as I mentioned.
But Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey is now highlighting the progress that is being made. This week, the city announced an early intervention system, a type of technology aimed at better tracking police.
That's what this early intervention system is all about.
The multi-million-dollar technology will use data to internally track MPD officers, pulling information from record systems, including use of force incidents, traffic stops, complaints, and hours worked. When an officer is flagged, that's when a supervisor is supposed to take action. We've learned this new early intervention system, which is part of the reform effort, will rely on supervisors to make it work. This in a department that has been criticized for failing to supervise its own officers for years.
You hurting me! You hurting me!
This video shows former officer Derek Chauvin kneeling on a 14-year-old's neck and beating him with a flashlight 3 years before George Floyd. The victim's lawsuit says MPD supervisors failed to discipline Chauvin that day. At this point, can you trust the supervisors within MPD?
They don't have a track record of trust. The Chauvin trial pointed that out.
We will only be as good as an agency as our worst supervisor.
It sounds like the system does have its limits.
Of course.
Do you think that it's going to be effective? Do you think it's going to actually make a difference?
It will make a difference. And it also has its limits. Both of those things can be true.
Give them better supervision that holds them accountable, because we know supervision that looks the other way when bad things happen is only encouraging that behavior to continue.
There was an organizational culture of flawed training of deficient accountability.
So I sat down with Rebecca Lucero. She is the commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Human Rights.
It was a thorough investigation. We did ride-alongs, we reviewed hundreds of hours of video camera footage, looked at a lot of data.
So the state's investigation began just a few days, I should say, right after George Floyd's murder.
George Floyd's murder was very much the seminal moment that moved that investigation forward.
MPD's data shows that officers are more likely to stop Black community members for longer. They're more likely to search Black community members or their vehicles. They're more likely to cite Black community members, use force against Black community members, and arrest Black community members during a traffic stop.
Race was the likely reason for the vast disparity in outcomes.
This is a court enforceable agreement. This is not something that's just based on a promise, right? So this has to happen.
We needed to change the policies and the training.
There's a lot to go through within this document. You talk about, specifically, I think the big one is policy.
We're still using the same use of force policy that we were using 5 years ago. That is very frustrating to me.
So in the progress reports, and when you specifically look under policy, you'll see that a lot of officers are frustrated by the length of this policy manual. And officers, in their words, say that this is cumbersome. They don't have time to look through every single page of this document when it comes to what they should do. If you're out there and you're an officer and you need to figure out if you're making the right decision, do you necessarily have time to go through all of these pages? And so officers are very frustrated by that.
It cannot be okay that we are still living under the same policies and guidelines that we know produced such horrendous race discrimination outcomes in the city of Minneapolis.
There's obviously systemic problems here. It's not just in the police department, it's in the society, it's in the city government.
And it can't just be all on MPD.
The federal consent decree is still up in the air.
The patterns and practices we observed made what happened to George Floyd possible.
So you have a city of Minneapolis that has findings at the state and federal level for violations of race-based policing.
This agreement is rock solid, and our commitment to it, regardless of the circumstances, is also rock solid.
Whether or not that consent decree gets entered by the court is yet to be determined at this point.
It forces both the Minneapolis Police Department and our communities to lean in and to make sure that, we own this.
As we try to make those changes, let's not break things that are working well. Let's be intentional about what we need to fix. And let's remember that human beings are a part of these systems.
And they're human beings too.
Police officers here, especially 5 years later, by and large, do not feel like their humanity has ever been acknowledged.
I remember one of my command officers talking about how her children being ridiculed in school because they knew her mother was a Minneapolis police officer.
By and large, we get good human beings that are willing to come into this profession, and it is the system that fails them.
There are really good people everywhere trying to do the work right, and they need the support to do that. They need systems in place to support them to do that.
We have to be better at supporting the health and wellness of our officers. We have to be better at providing them better training so that they're equipped to respond appropriately and give them better direction at what we expect.
Chief O'Hara, he just seems to be very raw about this is what happened and this is how we should move forward as a department. We can't have what happened on that day happen again.
Let's not forget that cops, that police chiefs, that union officials all over the country condemned what happened here.
For the men and women who wear that uniform, I need it for us to be on the right side of history.
And do you think you were?
Yes, yes. Absolutely. This was a monumental moment in American policing history.
Both chiefs are very frustrated when people try to rewrite history.
How do you feel about some people trying to rewrite history at this point?
I think it's dangerous. My late grandmother, she kept a old Jet magazine of the famous photograph of Miss Mamie Till standing over the open casket of her son Emmett Till. And I used to always wonder why my grandmother kept that magazine out in full display.
One chief was here for it. He said, you can't rewrite what we saw.
I can't breathe, man. Please.
When I saw that video, that's what came to mind. That that video was going to forever be cemented, certainly in my mind.
Mama! Mama!
Let's not forget that everyone saw that video and everyone knew what they saw.
One chief was not, but he's here to pick up the pieces of what happened.
It does go way too far to try and suggest that our eyes were lying to us.
He's not responsive right now, bro. No, bro, look at him. He's not responsive right now, bro. Bro, are you serious? He's gonna just stand here with that on his neck,
There has just been so much to dig through as far as the layers of personalities, the people who live near 38th in Chicago, what happened near 38th in Chicago. So it has just been a journey of trying to figure out what the process has been like for everyone, particularly in that area. Where we were, it seems, in 2020 is essentially where we are today. There is no plan, no clear plan as to what George Floyd Square will look like. And that is where we were in 2020. When you go to George Floyd Square, it just seems like it just happened.
A sigh.
It's really painful for me.
Might be one of the only things shared when you put the Minneapolis City Council and the Minneapolis mayor in one room to talk about George Floyd Square.
They put out a vision, and today 9 of you said no to that vision.
A vision not all can see.
We've already been damaged enough in our community.
9 out of 13 council members.
Councilmember Osmond. Aye.
Decided to override Mayor Jacob Frye's veto he made on February 19th.
Councilmember Chavez.
Aye.
And pauses plans for a flexible street option, allowing access for transit, emergency vehicles, and businesses.
We reduced George Floyd's murder to street infrastructure. Let's run buses and cars across the very place where George Floyd was killed. And that, for me, is a signal of erasure.
The council doubling down on delaying that project in order to explore a pedestrian mall instead.
It's white supremacy working at its finest. And that, for me, was enough to come in and say, no, we'll find a different path.
To say that, it doesn't make sense. It ignores what the community themselves have asked for, including Black community members, Black business owners.
So to digest what has happened and where a lot of this frustration is coming from, I reviewed hours of city council meetings and talked with people who live near 38th in Chicago, including council member Andrea Jenkins.
To this day, I'm still like, why am I still doing this?
Why are you?
I love my community. I love Black people. I think we deserve to have a beautiful community. I think we deserve to have a memorial that not only honors the life of George Floyd, but all the people who have been, whose lives have been cut short. For the broader community, we need to reopen the intersection at 38th in Chicago.
37 years.
That's how long Michael Kehoe has lived near the intersection. It's the same area where he protested for justice in 2020.
Why'd you feel the need to go?
To recognize the injustice that was done en masse with other people,
And those moments stuck with Michael.
This is my George Floyd pile of stuff.
Enough to keep track of them.
I keep thinking it's going to end, and it doesn't end.
In his office, you'll find letters written to City Council. He's been to over 70 meetings, and his frustration stems from data he volunteered to be a part of, collected for the city.
70% of the respondents want the streets opened up.
It is our responsibility to demonstrate leadership and make unpopular decisions when the data leads us to these decisions.
But other council members disagree, saying in this letter, George Floyd Square is not any other street in the city. The council's move is supported by community members who, for nearly 5 years, have been cultivating and reimagining the space in a way that centers ongoing calls for justice. So where does this leave us now? Well, for the city, it means
the motion to postpone to December 11th the consideration of the George Floyd Square pedestrian mall.
But for some of the people who live and work near George Floyd Square,
this is our livelihood. This is our community. This is how we feed our kids. And so when you have a couple council members playing around with our lives and our community, it means something to us.
Yet another delay means disappointment.
Y'all sitting here talking about all this politics stuff, but the small business is getting hurt.
You got the power over some people. We used to that. And we're not gonna stop fighting.
My name is Simone Woolridge, and I'm an anchor here at Fox 9.
And some more video here in Minneapolis. An AutoZone went up in flames during a protest.
I was working in Memphis at the time.
But how the FBI is now getting involved in the death of George Floyd.
So I feel like the reaction was very similar to the reaction anywhere else. It was disappointing.
And before we go ahead and show you this video, if you have not seen it, we need to warn you that you may find it disturbing.
It has just been a journey of trying to figure out what the process has been like for everyone, particularly in that area. I just took my mom to George Floyd Square a couple of weeks ago and saw some of the same people that I've been seeing, you know, trying to gather interviews. I was just there a couple of days ago, and one of the guys was like, "Hey, family, you're back." So it's just like, when you get to know people on that level, I think that changes everything.
Simone, act like you Simone and take control and just say.
I started to learn, a lot of people kind of said the same thing. Like, people show up and then they leave.
Well, we haven't, so let's finish our conversation.
Okay. They get there, they do an interview, and then they hop back in their car and they go back to their house. And that's it, and they never see them again. And that is what they are tired of. They're tired of people just getting there, getting their story, and then leaving. And so I think spending the time and getting to know people on a personal level has really kind of helped in telling their story, because that is the true piece of their story. You have to spend time with people in order to tell their story right.
I love my brother, man.
We were watching the funeral services.
Every word of worship with one accord.
And there was the image in the background of the mural. And that's when I just lost, like everything, all my defenses broke down.
It's time for us to stand up in George's name and say, "Get your knee off our necks."
I couldn't even stand up. It hit me so hard.
Oh, that mural has a lot of emotion put into the artistry. And so I talked to the muralist.
I think there isn't a single, person of color that didn't see themselves in that footage.
I can't breathe.
That didn't sympathize, that didn't put themselves in George Floyd's shoes.
What do you feel when you come here to George Floyd Square?
I make frequent visits to this space. A lot of times just to reflect and look back and just to, in a way, mourn. It's a very sad place to be.
May 26th of 2020, the day after George Floyd's murder, Canucks and a team of artists and strangers met on the side of this building without the owner's blessing.
He came out to the side door and he's like, "What are you guys doing?" And we looked and we're like, "We're painting a mural." And then he asked, "Who gave you permission?" And we said, "No one." And then he went back inside. And then he came back half an hour later and offered us T-shirts. And I said, no, we cannot take your T-shirts. And then it's like, is there anything we can do, like pay him? It's like, no. No, absolutely not.
The end of that conversation, but the beginning of a much bigger one.
When I talked to the artist, he talked about making it kind of eye-popping and eye-catching, but also keeping George Floyd's face in the center of it.
All of the imagery that you see on this piece is there to symbolize something, and nothing is on here by accident.
And then you have the names that go around it. You also have some of the people holding their fists up.
Breonna Taylor, Philando Castile, Freddie Gray, a symbol of hurt passed on to this community, unwanted but never unwilling to continue the fight, not just for justice here, but for justice everywhere.
You see all those names, that gets to you in an emotional way. We've been seeing just how many people have been driving past here. How does it make you feel just to know how many eyes are on your piece that you created?
Every time someone drives by, you know, they're reminded of what happened here. You know, they see George Floyd's name and they remember it. And I think that's part of the, you know, part of the point of having all these artists create all this artwork is that we cannot forget what happened here.
And when you feel you have nowhere else to turn,
we live in a world where we have to live in fear.
Sometimes art,
when we feel like we need to be protected, we're not,
can speak much louder than words.
But just walking around George Floyd Square, I think just looking at, you know, there's flowers out there, there are teddy bears, there are these photos. I think there's a photo of George Floyd specifically that it says something about being a dad. And I think those kind of things just sticks with you. And I think why it was so shocking to me, it just seems like it was something that happened yesterday when you look at what's there. And although it's frustrating because you wish you could speed up the process, but do you though? That's the thing, is you want to make sure that people are ready. You want to make sure people are trained. You want to make sure that people are in the right mindset. So when you get to the end of this, you are able to say that we are ready to go and that we will not experience what happened on May 25th of 2020.
Being an officer in Minneapolis today is very unique. Most notably, it's a chance to make a real difference in a police department, in a city, and in a community that will define the future of policing in our country. I truly believe Minneapolis will be the greatest law enforcement comeback story in America.
And I'm a believer that 5 and 10 and 20 years down the road, we can look back at this time frame and recognize that this was the moment where we finally did things differently in a way that truly transformed how we operate at the city. And hopefully we can be an example for others to follow as well.